Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the spiritual nature of water. This will be the second class in the series, and we're going to concentrate tonight on water and creation. So we're going to start with the first verse of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elokim Eta Shemayim ve'eta Aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So here, of course, there's encyclopedias of what we can learn on this first pasuk. We are trying to concentrate on water. So water is not mentioned in the first verse, but it actually is, because when we look at the words for heaven and earth, the two things that God created in the beginning of creation. So the word for heaven is Shemayim, which is the letter Shin and the word Mayim. So even though it's not explicit, Mayim is already integrated into the word for heaven. And we're going to explore that as we go through the 6 days of creation. Every day has a duality connected to it. This would be a much longer discussion, but it's very, very important, because if you look at the word Shemayim, so the Shin represents Eish, fire, and then it's the word Mayim. So here we have in the word Shemayim what we experience as opposites, a duality, fire and water. They seem as far apart on the spectrum as you can get. Water puts out fire, and fire makes water evaporate. So in this world, they are not just opposites, but they're, I don't know if enemies is the right word. That's really not the right word, but they're contradictory. They're opposites. They, in a sense, destroy each other, but not in heaven. In heaven, from God's perspective, there's no conflict between fire and water, because God holds opposites. When we go to the second day of creation, so we have the division that's made between the higher waters and the lower waters. So here I'm just pointing out that every day has a certain duality, certain opposites. So, and we're going to get to the second day of creation. The third day is we have the gathering of the waters and the revelation of the dry land. And here we see also there's actually a duality between land and sea. The fourth day is the sun and the moon. And they're complementary, but here in the beginning they were called the two great lights, and then they were called the great light and the small light. So again, you have a duality of the sun and the moon. The fifth day, you have the creation of the first animal life, but it's divided between animals in the sea and the birds. So you have sea-going life, and you also have flying birds. And on the 6th day of creation, you have animal and human. And in a sense, a human being is a construct of animal and divine soul. So we see a duality throughout creation. And here it's hinted to already in heaven, the idea of fire and water in the same word. That is what heaven is. Now, the numerical value of Shemayim is 390. 390 equals Haneshama, the soul. So this is telling us something very important, because everyone points out that when it says in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, it's not the heaven that we think of, and it's not the earth that we think of. We think earth, we think of our globe, our planet. But here, the heaven and earth are much broader. Shemayim means everything spiritual that would ever be created, and Aretz means everything physical that would ever be created. They're not the actual entities that we call earth and heaven. And we see that because only in the second day, when the upper waters are separated from the lower waters, were the upper waters called Shemayim. They didn't really get that name until the second day, even though it appears right in the first verse. So here, it's important to see that the neshama is also a construct, not only between animal and divine, or if you take the word Adam, you have dam, which is blood, that's the physical body, and you have the aleph, which is the divine soul. So also within a human being, you have the intellectual and emotional characteristics of fire and water. And this comes through the sfirot, where the right side of the sfirot is called the column of water, and the left side is called the column of fire. Now, I mentioned that Shemayim is Gematria 390. There's another very, very important word with the same Gematria, and that is Shemin, oil. This is the oil that is used to light the menorah in the temple, which represents God's light in the universe and the pre-creation infinite light of God. So it's very important to point out that the word shemen, oil, and we always relate it to olive oil, especially in Eretz Yisrael, is the same gematria as Shemayim. And as we said, Shemayim in the first verse is the idea of everything spiritual that would be created. Now, when you look at Shemen, oil, you see something that we take for granted, but it's a bit miraculous, is that Shemen is a liquid. So why would we think liquid would burn? If you put a wick in water and you lit it, the water would put out the fire. But there's something very special about Shemen, that it burns. It's a liquid, but it burns. Now, it's not the only liquid that burns. You have oil. But in Hebrew, oil is called Shemen. When you put oil in your car, it's actually called Shemen. So all of this is just an introduction that in the first verse, you have fire and water. And the fire and water translate into spiritual and physical. They translate into soul and body. Now, last week, we began to explore the letter Mem. The letter Mem is the 13th letter. And we connected it very much to the month of Elul, because the whole month is called the month of Rachamim, a month of compassion, because in Slichot, we repeat many times the 13 midot of Rachamim. the 13 aspects of compassion. So this idea of 13 is connected to Mem because Mem is the 13th letter, and Mem is the letter of water, because the word for water in Hebrew is Mem Yud Mem. So I'm reviewing that because there's another idea, and this will lead into some very, very deep understandings of water, is that in Kabbalah, it's talked about that there are 13 letter mems in the primordial air. Now, this is a very mysterious statement. 13 mems in the primordial air. And it gets very, very deep into some Kabbalistic concepts. But the idea is that it helps us understand in the second verse of the Torah. It says, "V'ha'oretz hayta tohu v'vohu, v'choshech al pnei ha'tahom, v'ruach Elokim mirachefet al pnei hamayim." The earth was chaotic and void, and there was darkness on the face of the deep, or the abyss, and the Spirit of God hovered or moved across the water. So everyone asks, where did water come from? Where does it say in the Torah that God created water? The very next, first we have heaven and earth. And the next verse, the third verse, God creates light. But nowhere does it say that God created water. It just seems to be there. The Spirit of God hovered or moved across the water. So the water here, and this is going to run through our whole series. This is what makes water so unique and special and almost mysterious and magical, because there's something about water that it bridges before creation and after creation. And that's the symbolism of this idea that we're talking about before creation in what's called the primordial air. And this primordial air is really the infinite light of God before the contraction. And we're told that the contraction actually happens in the primordial air where there are these 13 mems. But these 13 mems represent water. So this is a very Kabbalistic idea, but we'll see that it's going to go a long way to explain the very nature of water. There's something about water that is primordial, that is before creation. Now, one of the ways we could see this is that we're told that before creation, the only thing that existed was the infinite light of God. There was the essence of God and the infinite light of God. Well, there's something very, very important that connects light and water. And that is they're both waves. Water acts as a wave, and light, it's both a particle, but also a wave. And so there's a deep connection between light and water. And so these 13 mems in the primordial air represent this idea of a bridge, a connection between pre-creation and after creation. Just like the infinite light of God is also manifest in this world. It's pre-creation, the infinite light of God, but it's also here. And so last week we talked about that the 13 mems are connected to the 13 midot of rachamim and the 13 inner dimensions of the sfirot. So just like the idea of the 13 midot of rachamim, the 13 aspects of compassion is what allows an infinite God to create and maintain a finite world. It's through these 13 channels of rachamim, of compassion, and it's through the 13 channels of the inner dimensions of the sfirot. And this helps us understand why the Torah doesn't mention the creation of water. It just seems to be there. Now, I want to add a Torah from Reb Shlomo about this. And he starts with this idea that where does water come from? It doesn't mention in the Torah the creation of water. And so he basically says in a more simple way, not a Kabbalistic way, but there's something about water that is very primordial, that spans infinite and finite. Just like there's infinite light and finite light, there's an aspect of water that connects us to infinite. And he says something very deep for all of us. He says, too many of us forget our infinite starting point, the infinite point of the soul that comes down into the body, our connection to an infinite, eternal God. And when we forget this by getting too involved in the materialistic trappings of this world, we forget our infinite potential. And so then he connects it, as we will as we go further, also the idea of purity and impurity. In Hebrew, the word tahor, purity, also it means to be open. It means to be flowing. And tameh, tuma, is very close to the meaning of being closed, being shut off, being disconnected. And so Reb Shlomo just says that this is we'll call it the mystical nature of water, is that it reconnects us to the infinite spark of God in our neshama. And then he makes another incredible idea here, is before creation, all there is the oneness of God. The Torah begins with a big bet, a big letter bet, which is the number 2, to indicate that by creating a seemingly finite world of individuals who have free will, there is now plurality in the world. There seems the oneness, one has to work very hard to see and experience and be aware of the oneness, because we're just bombarded with materialism and stimuli 24/7. So Reb Shlomo points out that he said like this. He said, if you take an apple and you put another apple on top of it, you now have two apples. And if you put another apple on top, you have another apple. And you could build a tower forever, but each apple is going to remain separate. He said with water, though, if you have one drop of water and then you put another drop of water, they unify. You can no longer tell the difference between the first drop and the second drop. And so this is actually the secret of the word mayim. Mem, yud, mem. The yud is a drop of water. The yud even looks like a drop of water. But once it goes into the river or the sea or the ocean or the mikvah, you cannot discern between the individual drops of water. They become unified. So Reb Shlomo said that's the secret of water, that it connects us back to the one God, to the one eternal, infinite source of all. It's a very, very beautiful and deep idea. Okay. Now, continuing with the second day of creation. So it says that the Spirit of God hovered over the water. Okay, so here, I'm going to bring in some science and some Aryeh Kaplan. So from a scientific point of view, and Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan speaks about this also, is that in the initial era of creation, from a physical point of view, after the Big Bang, so we're told that everything that existed was in a, I think Brian Greene called it an exquisitely hot plasma. In other words, whatever there was, what we'll call matter or energy, was like almost like water, a liquid form. In other words, it was so hot, individual particles or atoms could not form. There was just this, like you can imagine, like lava, just this exquisitely hot plasma was all there was. Nothing could actually form until matter began to cool down. Only then could individual particles and atoms begin to form, and then stars and galaxies and what we call the universe. So many people who want to connect science and Torah look at the idea where it says that the Spirit of God hovered over the water as this idea that at that point of creation, because the beginning of the verse is that the earth was chaotic and void. Now here, again, the earth being mentioned is not our planet per se. It's physical reality. And it was chaotic and void. This is again, scientifically, this is right after the Big Bang. So this is just one way to look at this. Rabbi Kaplan points out that the physical reality is constructed from two basic ideas: a water and solid. Water here means anything fluid and a solid. And he explains that water is in a fluid state, and solid matter, there's some sense of permanence there, even though mountains change also. The earth changes, but nonetheless, it appears to be more permanent. So this is really going back to heaven and earth, where earth is like solid, and heaven, because it's fire and water, it's in a state of fluidity. Anyone looks at a fire, it's in a state of movement. It's a state of movement. And so here, this idea that the Spirit of God moved across the water. In other words, this was the state of reality at that point. And only on the second day, you have something somewhat permanent, which is called the firmament, which comes and divides between the upper waters and the lower waters. And here on the second day, creation is beginning to move into a state of more permanence, less fluid, enough that what we call material reality can be formed. Now let's go to the word mirachefet, that the Spirit of God hovered or moved across or caused to move the water. So the Arizal explains in a very, very deep way. And remember, the beginning of the pasuk is V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu. So this is obviously relating to the world of tohu, a previous world. And what we understand is in this previous world, the lights were so strong, the vessels could not hold them and they shattered. The breaking of the vessels and the shattered pieces of the vessels and the light that was contained in them were spread out, and that became the material of this world, Olam HaTikun. So the Arizal says, how many vessels broke? 288. Now, this is not like a famous number. It's not like 100 or 10 or 613. It seems a little bit obtruse. Why 288 vessels broke? Now, if you look at the word mirachefet, anyone can open up their Chumash to the second verse. The first and last letter of the word mirachefet, hovered, is mem and tav. Spells met, died, met. The middle letters, the resh, chet, and pei, equal 288. So the Arizal says this is a hint to the breaking of the vessels in the world of Tohu. This is all alluded to in the second verse. Rav Ginsburg points out that this word mirachefet is the 18th word of the Torah. Now 18 equals the word chai, life. But here, the Ari is saying 288 sparks died. So here you have the mystery of life and death. That the shattering of the vessels, the death of the vessels, is what was the material, the fruitfulness of new birth. As we've explained, when a tree loses its leaves and its blossoms, and if you don't pick the fruit falls off the tree. And then in the course of the winter, it becomes broken down and incorporated into the earth over a couple of years. And it becomes the fertilizer for new growth. So that's why this word mirachefet is 288 sparks died, but it's the 18th word. This death is the rebirth of this world, the world of tikkun. And this hovering is over the waters. And that's why water has the ability to purify, and the experience of going into water, especially a mikvah, we will get to the mikvah, is an experience of rebirth for women and men. Going into the mikvah is an experience of rebirth. And that's why the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. And that's the power, the mystical power of water, is it connects us to a primordial part of our soul that we need to connect to, especially with the Yamim Hanoraim coming, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. This is like prime time to connect to the depths of our souls, our ultimate connection with Hashem. And as Reb Shlomo said, this idea of water, it represents unity. So we'll get to the water of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we'll see how important water is in these holidays, because it reconnects us with this unity. Okay, we are going to continue now. And we'll continue with the idea of creation and water. So we know that after the first account of creation, the first 6 days in Shabbat, the Torah goes back and starts to fill in some of the spaces between the lines here. And so if anyone wants to look it up, it's the 2nd chapter, the 5th verse. So it says like this: B'chol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz. Now I just want to explain that on the 3rd day of creation, we're told that God created the vegetable kingdom, the grasses and the herbs and the trees, and how they would give birth to new generations of trees through the seed. And so one would assume that everything started growing. Now, all of a sudden, the Torah is saying, no, it wasn't that simple. So it says like this: and it was that before all of the vegetable kingdom appeared on the Oretz, and every grass and herb of the field before it sprouted, because God had not caused rain or precipitation to come upon the earth. V'ha'adam ein la'avodat adama, and there was no person to work the field. So the explanation is pretty much right what it says, that Rashi says all of the vegetable kingdom was created on the third day, but let's call it in potential. It was there, but it had not sprouted because there was no precipitation. But then the Torah adds not just that, but there was no human being to work the field. So Rashi says an amazing thing. What does that mean? What's the connection? Why does it matter if there was man? All it needed was water, rain from God. And so Rashi says that until there was man, the consciousness of the world didn't realize that water was needed to make things grow. In other words, God created the vegetable kingdom, but it was missing an ingredient. It didn't quite understand that it needed water to grow. So Rashi continues, when Adam realized that it needed rain, he prayed for it, and the rain, and then the next verse says like this: the aid ya'aleh min haaretz, and a mist came up from the land. Rashi actually says that this mist it went up to the lower waters and drew down rain, but a mist came up from the earth, v'hishkia kol pnei adama, and it watered the whole face of the earth, and then everything began to grow. Okay, so that's an important idea. But now we have like something that seems chronologically out of order. Listen what it says. V'yetzer Hashem Elokim et Adam afar mina adama, and God formed the human from the dust of the earth. V'yipach bi'afav nishmat chayim, and he blew into his nostril a living soul. V'yihi Adam lenefesh chaya, and Adam became a living soul. So I have to say, only today, the thought I'm going to give over to you came into my head. I've read this 100 times, but I realized something like very, very mysterious here. The previous verse says that it wasn't until Adam was created and prayed for the rain that everything grew. And then it says that a mist came up, which is implying that Adam was already alive and prayed for the rain and set in motion this mist to come up, draw down water, and make everything grow. But the next verse, it appears that Adam wasn't created yet. And Rashi even says, this is very symbolic and metaphorical, says that God created man from the dust of the earth. But the verse before it says that precipitation had come. So Rashi says, again, this is symbolic, metaphorically, says Adam was created like kneading dough. You take flour, but you have to put some water in it. And God kneaded Adam and created him. Okay, so again, this is metaphorical. But the thought that came into my mind is it's a very deep idea. And this is something I'm working on in a separate project I'm working on about soul and consciousness in all of creation. And this is talked about by the Arizal, the Baal Shem Tov, the idea that not just man, animal, and vegetation has life, but even vegetation has consciousness, but so does the mineral world. So does the mineral world. Everything has consciousness, not our consciousness, different levels of consciousness, but there is consciousness because everything comes from a spark of God. Nothing can exist without a spark of God, and God is his consciousness. And so everything has a state of consciousness. So one of the greatest scientists, his name is, I don't know, his first name is Wheeler. So in quantum physics now, one of the cutting edges of quantum physics is the role of consciousness in reality. This is just a huge thing, how the observer affects reality. And the observer, of course, is consciousness. But Wheeler says like this, and this is confirmed in Kabbalah, even in Rashi. Wheeler says that if it wasn't built in to the, let's call it the program, into the hard drive of creation, that there would be in the future human consciousness, creation could not have happened. Creation could not have happened. So this is the idea that we're seeing right here. This is an amazing thing. If we just follow the verses, first it says nothing could grow because God had not watered the earth. And then Rashi explains God had not watered the earth because there was no human to realize that water was needed and would pray for it. And that's what brought the water. But the next verse, you have the creation of man. He wasn't created yet. So we can understand from the flow of these verses that obviously God knows past, present, and future. God knows that there'll be a human being. The next verse, he creates him. And so therefore, because there would be human consciousness and man would pray for rain, then God could bring it already, even before the creation of man. So this is like an incredible idea, and it strengthens this idea of water being like primordial, being primordial. So this whole idea just came to me today. And so it's just like, it's been sitting on me all day long. I'm glad I could give it over. Okay, I want to continue because I want to finish today the segment called Water and Creation. We will never finish it. We're just, believe me, we're just scratching the surface here. But the next place that we see in a significant way water is that when the Torah begins to explain the Garden of Eden and that God placed Adam in this Garden of Eden, and then what happened with the two trees, the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the snake, the sin, and the expulsion, right in the middle, there is an explanation of a river that flowed out of Eden. So it says like this. For those who want to follow, it's chapter 2, verse 10. The Nahar Yotze Me'eden. A river comes out from Eden, lahashkot et hagan, to water the garden. Umisham Yipared v'haya la'arba rashim. And from there, it divided into 4 headwaters. Okay? And then it goes on and it names the 4, and it gives very, very symbolic explanations of these rivers. That, for right now, we're not going to get into. We're just going to get into this idea: what is this river doing there, and what does it mean? There was a river, and it broke off into 4 different rivers or streams. So one thing we can learn from this is that God, who is one, he is known to us by a 4-letter name of God. In other words, the essence of God is in a category of its own. And then we have 4 letters of God's name. In science, we're told that right after the Big Bang, the 4 cardinal forces of the universe, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity, were all contained in what's called the singularity. It was only one force. And those 4, as the universe cooled, these 4 forces separated into 4 distinct forces. The ones that I just mentioned: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. So here you see this alluded to. Then in Kabbalah, we're told that there are 4 Kabbalistic worlds, but they're coming from a previous world called Adam Kadmon. So you have one river, Adam Kadmon, and it splits into 4 worlds: Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. All of these are alluded to in this river from Eden that splits off into 4 rivers. And then it mentions them, and they're actually real rivers in this world. And Rashi tells us in different things: it's the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the other one is a bit mysterious. It's called the Gihon, but the Gihon is actually the source of water for Jerusalem. That is the source of water, and it's still there. Actually, you can go down into the city of David, and people actually walk through this spring called the Gihon. Whether that's the Gihon mentioned here, there's a question, but we'll look deeper into that. So what is the significance of this river in Eden? So first of all, I want to point out, it says that a river came out, a Nahar came out from Eden to water the Gan, the garden. So here we see something, because we always call it Gan Eden. But here it says the river came out of the place called Eden, and the river came to the garden. Anyways, it's pointed out that the first 3 letters of those 3 entities, Eden is an ayin, the Nun is Nahar, and the Gimel is Gan. But if you permute them, it spells Oneg, pleasure. This is what's called the secret of Oneg Shabbos. What's the connection? Because we're told that Shabbos brings us back to the state of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. So this also tells us the role of water here. It's the river coming out of Eden to water the garden. This is the source of pleasure, and this is the pleasure of Shabbat, which connects us to Gan Eden. So the sages say all water in the world are ultimately connected to this river that comes out of Eden. This is the source of all water. This is the source of all water. And so the importance, as we will explore the importance of water in Jewish law, in Jewish custom, in Jewish ritual, all of it ultimately is connected to bringing us back to a state of perfection of Gan Eden. So this is such an important idea of the spiritual nature of water. And that's the importance of this river coming out of Eden. And we're actually told that after Adam and Chava had to leave the garden, they underwent a process of tshuva. And the Midrash says that Adam stood in a river, and I forgot for how long. It was like a lengthy amount of time to do tshuva. In other words, he connected the idea of doing tshuva that he needed to be in a river. He needed to have the water purify him from having eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so one last idea is, we talked before about purity and impurity. And so almost all impurity, ritual impurity, is connected to death. What's called tumat met, death, and especially the laws of nida, of menstruating women, because just biologically what's happening in the process of menstruation is the blood that was there potentially so that there could be a fertilized egg which would bring new life. But if that egg is not fertilized, then the female body expels the blood, the lining that would have caused life. And so therefore, symbolically, it's like a mini death, because the egg was not fertilized and new life didn't come. And so the whole idea of menstruation and nida is connected to the idea of death. And we're told that, and of course, touching a dead body, this is called tumat met. But we're told that the eating of the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, that sin led to death. And so if that sin led to death, well, and that death leads to impurity. So how do we become pure? Through water. And that's why ritually, all impurity, ritual impurity entails, whether it's a male or a female, of going to the mikvah. Now, almost all of these laws were more in place when there was a temple. Really, the only one that remains is Nida, the laws of Nida. But at the time of the temple, probably men went to the mikvah more than women, because that was the only way to become pure. So again, we can understand the role of water here, that water has the power to purify, of rebirth. And this goes back to Ruach Elokim mirachefet al pnei hamayim, is that mirachefet, according to the Ari, is an allusion to the breaking of the vessels. But the breaking of the vessels leads to new life. That's why it's the 18th word in the Torah. That the breaking of the vessels in the bigger picture was not a mistake, and it was not even negative. It's just that stage of creation was over, and now it's ready for a new stage. So the same thing, even with the laws of Nida. That particular egg was not fertilized, so it's expelled, just like Adam and Chava were expelled from the garden. There's a very deep connection, because one of the results for at least for Eve, of Chava, was the whole idea of giving birth in not a painless way, put it that way. That along with giving birth, there would come pain. So all of these ideas are connected. And I think that is a good place to stop. So hopefully tonight we have scratched the surface of water in creation. The idea of water in Shemayim, Eish and Mayim, the water that seems to bridge pre-creation and after creation. I'm going to go a little bit longer tonight, because I realized I did miss something, and that's the second day of creation. And that's when the upper waters were separated from the lower waters, with a rakia in the middle. One second. So I just want everyone to imagine for a second the letter Aleph. The letter Aleph has a slanted Vav with a Yud below and a Yud above. Everyone imagine the letter Aleph. And so it's given over in Kabbalah that the shape of the Aleph is in one of its meanings, is a replica of what happened in the second day. The slanted Vav is the firmament. The upper Yud is the upper waters, and the lower Yud are the lower waters. And so here, and we're told that the Vav, its function is to divide and unify at the same time, simultaneously. So even though on the surface, it's talking about the separation of the upper waters and the lower waters, really, they ultimately are connected. And so the upper waters are called just like Shemayim is called the spiritual realm, the lower waters are called the material realm. But we know that the philosophy and the symbolism of all the mitzvot is to connect physical and spiritual. And so the firmament appears to be dividing between the two, but we know that our task is actually to unite the two. And we're told that on the second day of creation, it's the only day where God doesn't say that he looked and saw ki tov, that it was good. And so our sages tell us that's because that the potential for machloket, for disagreement, comes from the second day of creation. Because if you don't see the Vav unifying the physical and the spiritual, then you end up seeing it separating, and that leads to a bipolar view of the world, a world of opposites, a dualistic world. And that is the source of all machloket. When we can't see the unity, when we can't see Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, when there's a disagreement, if you can't see that these and these are words of the living God, then we end up seeing division. And so it doesn't say that God saw that it was good on that day. It wasn't that it wasn't good. It's just the potential is there for disagreement. And like we said, that the spiritual nature of water is unity, And so the second day represents the appearance of water being separate. There's upper waters and lower waters. And in a certain sense, there is a reality to this, but the true reality is there is no division. There is no division. And so Mayim really represents, because of the second day, and if you remember, those who were here last week, we discussed this idea of Rabbi Akiva when they went into the Pardes. He said, don't say water, water. In other words, don't divide between the two waters. When you get to the place of pure marble, of a pure vision of God, we see Shemayim as Eish and Mayim, fire and water. We see like they don't go together. But in heaven, fire and water are perfectly normal and compatible. So that's what Rabbi Akiva warned them. When you get to the place of pure marble, don't come with your preconceived notion of a dualistic bipolar world. When you get to that place of pure unity, you have to see beyond the divisions. And so that's why he said, don't say water, water, because the essence of water is unification. It's unified. You can even see it in the word itself. It's mem, yud, mem. It's very symmetrical. It's like it fits together. Mem, yud, mem. So I'll end with a bracha. You know, Mayim is Gematria 90. And when you add what's called the kola, one for the word, you have 91, which is Amen. So every time we say Amen, we can imagine being surrounded by purifying waters. You know why I'm saying this? We'll get to this, is because every time we say Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, we say it with the letters Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, Adni, Adonai. So Yud Kei Vav Kei and the Shem Adni equals 91, which is Gematria Sukkah. We'll get to it. So every time we say God's name, we can imagine being in the protective shade of God's sukkah. But here we have a different visualization. Every time we say God's name, we can imagine being purified with the waters from Eden. Halavai, we should be able to experience that.